Let me get right. Good morning. We're learning a schutz for Shlema for Ilan Chai Basarach and Zanliya for the Shama for Meir Ben Elazar. We are on Daf Ayin Vav Amid Beis, right in the middle by the two dots. The Mishnah had said Nishbar Ha'etzem. It depends if the bone broke of an animal, then depends whether roiv of the basar and the ar in the basar covers the broken bone. It means this is talking about a compound fracture where the Gemara will say that later on clearly, where it sticks through the skin, but it depends on whether we're going to see whether that bone is mostly covered or not. Whether it's going to, whether the shechita of the animal is going to kasher the that part of the part that's broken off, the remaining part of the aver. Samarav l'mayla min hakuva, if it's above the knee. And this is talking about the lower knee, right? We said there were two joints, the lower joint. So if it's above that lower joint where this fracture occurred in Reva Basakayim, Zev Zeh Mutter. If most of the basar that covers it is still there, then both the limb that's past the break as well as the behemoth itself are mutter with the shechita. It's considered a full-fledged animal. The break is something that can be repaired. It will heal eventually, since right the basar is on top of it. So it's just a break, and that's all. It's a fracture that will heal, and everything, the animal as well as the limb, will be fine, and therefore the shechita makes it all tar. It's going to make all kosher. Bim lav zev zeh aser. But if it doesn't cover over the basar and the ar don't cover over the bone, both the animal as well as the limb, the shechita is not going to be tired. The animal, it's not going to be allowed to eat because it's a treifa. It's going to die. This is not repairable, and the animal will ultimately die from it, as well as that limb is certainly going to be aser because the shechita it's as if it was cut off, so the shechita wouldn't apply to it anyway. It's a treifa. Rav says if it's below that joint, that first joint, meaning in the lowest part of the animal. So in Roeva Basar Kaim Zevazem Mutter. Again, if Roeva the Basar is Kaim, it's not a problem at all, certainly. Im Lav, but if it's not, Aver Aser, the Aver is Aser, because it's considered to be as if it's cut off, and the Shechita won't help it. But the Behem is Mutter, because like we said, even if it's cut off below that joint, that doesn't make it into a treifa, so the animal is not a treifa, and it's Mutter with the Shechita. Shmuel Amar Bein Lamayla Bein Lamata. Shmuel says there's no difference whether it's above or below that joint. In Roiv Habasar Kayim Zev Zeh Mutter, everyone agrees. Basically, we could have left out this whole Roiv Habasar Kayim because if Roiv Habasar Kayim, it's all going to heal. So in either case, it's going to be mutter, both the animal as well as the aver. In Lav, aver also behem muteres. But if both above the knee, well, above the joint and below the joint, if the basar and the oil are not covering over the bone, so it's not going to be repaired. So the aver is going to be aser because the aver is going to be aser because it wasn't part of the shechita. Well, behema muteres, even if it's above the knee, the behema will still be mutter, because he says it's not considered to be like as if you cut even though it's a broken bone, that's not going to heal, but it doesn't become a treifa. What it does is it's something that it can eventually heal. It's not going to kill the animal, because the Tzemes Hagidim weren't cut. All that happened was that the bone broke. So therefore, it's not going to kill the animal, and it's not going to be awesome.
Where are we up to?
We are on the first wide line at Ayin Vav Amid Beis. Maskav Rav Nachman l'Shmuel. Rav Nachman asked Shmuel, Yoimu Evi Menu Mutu Ba'ashpa Umuteres. He asked, how can this be? In the end, this this animal, when this aver is going to have to be thrown out, right? Because the aver itself, Shmuel agreed, whether it's above or below the knee, the aver is going to be usher if it's not mostly covered with ur and basar, and so you're gonna have to cut it off. You're gonna have to throw it out because the aver is also the shechit didn't help it. How are you gonna say that the rest of the animal will be mutter? As we're gonna see in a minute, because uh, we'll see in a minute what the issue is. I guess you could say the issue is that people are gonna see it and they're gonna think that this was an animal that it was amputated, that it was cut off, right? They're going to see that you cut off, you had to cut it off, you had to throw it out. So they're going to say that even though it's above, that you're throwing it out, how can you, if it's amputated, l'chayr, it should make it into a treifa. Amalei Ravacha Ravuna Rav Nachman L'Rav Nami Yom Revim Mena Mutal Bashim Muteres. Rav agrees that if it's that if it's above the knee, he said, I'm sorry, Lamata, he agrees Lamata and Arkuva. He says Lamayla and Arkuva, both of them are going to be awesome. But Lamata and Arkuva, he says that you throw away the limb and the rest of the animal is going to be mutter. So why you ask this on Shmuel, you have the same question on Rav. He says the only problem is if it's an animal, if it's a limb that's above the knee, then we have a problem. Because above the knee, people know that it becomes a treifa if it gets cut off. So it should be awesome in the Rabbanon, even if it didn't get cut off, if it was just that the bone broke, but was saying that the aver is going to be awesome. So you're not going to be able to eat that aver. So the butcher is going to cut it off after the behema is shechted. So people are going to look at it, they're going to say, oh, look, this is an animal that's amputated above the joint. And even so, you're allowed to eat the animal. It's not a treifa. But no, below the joint, they know that that's not a place that makes it a treifa. So that's not a kasha on Rav. So tomorrow, sholchu mitom hilchos kavase de Rav. They paskin halacha is like Rav. Hada sholchu kavase de Shmuel. Then they reverse themselves. They know the halacha is like Shmuel. Hada sholchu kavase de Rav. They reversed and they said like Rav. The Gemara says another din. So this din that we said that where roiv of the basar, are in the basar is not covering the bone. The aver, everyone's going to agree that in any case, whether it's above or below the joint, that the aver itself is going to be awesome. Gemara says the aver asam mitama b'masa. This aver has the din of aver menachai, which shares the din of nevela, that it's going to be mitama if you carry it, which is a din of nevela, not of a treif. Maser Chizda. Loyim tiara, because it's Ever Menachai. Maser Chizda, loyim tiara Chitas treifa. Oisa vesa Ever Hamadoldo ba, Dava Begufa. We said, if you're going to say that the Shechita of a treifa is going to be mater, the Aver that is attached but cut, but it's still attached with some basar, and as well as Oisa, it will answer the animal, as well as the shechita is matar the treifa, as well as the ava that's hanging off of it, from the din that even though it's not going to become kash to eat because it's a treifa, but the shechita will make it that it's not going to be an avela. So he said titar as a uber davar she'ena gufa. Does that mean it will be matar the uber, which is not part of the guf? So, but in any case, we see this is the brisa we had before. We were talking about aver sticking out from the womb of the mother. But as part of the brisa, we said it's an aver hamaduldulba. If you have an aver that's attached, the shchita of the mother, who's a treifa, will be matarit that it's not going to be an avela. So over here, Certainly, if it's not a treifa, it's going to retire it from the din of avela. So why are we saying that this aver has a din of aver menachai, that it's treated as an avela? Amli Rabba Hodor Apircha Lamalach. Why do you have to go and ask this kasha from Brisa? It's taka good kasha, but you could have asked it from a Mishnah. Oisim Masnisen. We said this is talking again about the pastures. It's talking about uh, a aver as well as basar that is hanging off of an animal. So we say nishka tavahema hokshur b'domeh divrei Remeir says when you shecht the behema with this dangling aver, it becomes hokshur lekabel tuma because the blood of the shchita gets on the animal. So it's going to be make it hokshur lekabel tuma. Now, something that's an avela does not need to be hokshur lekabel tuma. It itself becomes an avatuma. Doesn't need to have liquid go on it in order to be able to be mekabel tuma. It's a tuma itself. He says no, it doesn't become hukshur through this dam, and therefore it's not ready to be mekabel tuma. But according to both shitas, it needs to be hukshur lekabel tuma. So it's obviously not available. He says that we had already discussed earlier that it's not talking about the aver that's meduldal. It might only be talking about the basar of the aver meduldal as well as the basar that's hanging. But an aver that's meduldal enechanami might be treated as aver menachai. He was saying this din that the din of Rav that if the animal has etzem and has a bone that's broken, if it's covered with ar and basar, it won't be metama. If it's above the what do you call it, the joint, the lower joint. So then Rav said, if it's broken, the animal itself is going to be usher to eat. It's going to be considered a treifa. It's not going to be considered just like a broken bone. It's going to be considered as if it broke off. Amalei Yasher. He said, Baruch Hashem, you Yasher Kayach, that you pass him like Rab. And this is also what the lion in Bavel paskin. Aryich Manu, Shmuel. And who's the king? Who's the lion? That's Shmuel. For Mithlik Polig. Shmuel was the one who argued on Rav. So why are you saying that Shmuel agreed to Rav when Shmuel was the bar plukta of Rav over here in our Gemara? So the Mahadav Shmuel legabi de Rav. Shmuel was chayzer and he paskin like Rav in the end. Taraban. Nishbara etzem v'yatza l'chutz. If the bone broke and it was a compound fracture, that the bone didn't just break internally, but it pierced the skin and it went outside. Im aru basar chayvin esru. Like our Mishnah said, if the skin and the flesh cover most of it, mutter, then it's going to be mutter. Like we said, that will recover, and it's not going to cause any problems. It's not going to make anything usher. If you shecht it, the whole thing's going to be mutter. Both the animal is not a treifa, and the limb is not going to be considered to be separated. The shita won't apply to it. Bim lav, but if it's not covered usher, then it's going to be usher. Like according to the rules that Rav said. The kama rubai, what is considered that roiv of it is covered? It has to be roiv of the thickness of the bone. That means when it breaks, you expose the inside of the bone. So roiv of that thickness has to be covered. For amila roiv kef, and others say no, it doesn't mean the roiv of the thickness of the bone, but rather the roiv of the circumference around the bone has to be covered. Amar Rapapa, Helkach b'ina roiv oiv b'ina roiv kefa. Therefore, you need both of them, since we don't know who to paskin. Both roiv of the thickness, the cross section of the bone has to be covered, as well as roiv of the outside of the bone has to be covered. Amar Ula Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Ayr Hareyu Kabasa. He says that if if you don't have the basar anymore covering the bone, the skin is also if that covers the bone, that's enough. Amr of Nachman le'ula v'leim amar or mitzdaref lebasar. The or basar ktani. The Mishnah had said or ubasar. If you have or and basar, um, it doesn't say that you could have just or. It says or together with basar. So maybe you should just say that um if you have basar on half of it, you could also have or for the other half. For some reason, the Gemara assumes that basar is more central, is more relevant to the health of the aver. So we're saying that the Mishnah says you can have ar together with basar. So that means you can have even half of it be ar, but you need at least half to be basar as well. He says, no, by me, I don't have that nusach of the Mishnah. My gears of the Mishnah is either ar or basar, and just ar is enough to guarantee the healing of the if it's covered mostly covered even with just ar, that's enough to guarantee that it's going to heal in Ganset. He said the other way around. He said that if you have half of it of basar, the ar can do the other half. Let's say that ar can only be up to 50%, but it can't be. You have to have it can only up to 49%, but you have to have at least roiv of basar. Amalei, I know of the Yadana. I know that that's not required. It could be half and half. Ahuba Guzla. There was this goose, the Havavei Rav Yitzchak, by Rav Yitzchak, the Ar Mitzdaref Basar, where it was have 50-50. It was half Ar and half Basar covering the broken bone. But also Kamed Rav Yochanan v'Achsher. Rav Yochanan says it was kosher. So I know that it doesn't have to be Roy Basar. It could even be 50-50. Amalei by Guzla Kamed. You're talking about a goose. By Guzla the Rachach Shani. By a goose, the skin is soft. So the skin is more like basar. So that's why it could be 50-50. That ar is more flesh-like. So therefore it has more recuperative powers, more like the basar. So that's why you could have 50-50. Hanu gidin rach and the asal kamei the rabba. There was a case where there were soft sinews that were covering the broken bone. They want to know, does it have the status of skin that you could have up to 50%, or is it the status of basar that it could be even fully covered just by it? He says, what do you have to worry about? L'chayra, it's this soft gidin are treated like basar. If you have soft gidin that will eventually become hard. Nimna layim b'Pesach. If someone wants to join a chabura of Pesach, and all that's left is a kazayas of these gidin, they're considered like basar that you could be counting them as part of the carbon Pesach. So you see that it's considered as basar. You can't be counted for bones or for hooves or for skin that remains hard. So these gidin that are soft are treated like basar. So therefore, there's no reason why these gidin should also not be considered as basar legabi, that the broken bone underneath it will be healed by it. And secondly, we don't want to make that if depending on whether it's above or below the knee, we don't want to make that the rest of the animal as well as that aver should become asur, also treifa, and else aver minachai, because it's going to cost money. Amir Papa L'Rabba or Shimon Lakish, according to Reish Lakish, who disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan, he says these gidin that are going to eventually be hard cannot be included in the Pesach. So you have to be chayshish for him. V'isur deraisa, and we're talking about isur deraisa. V'at amrit my lechish. And you say you have to, well, that we don't have to worry about it because the Torah is chasal v'maynin shel Yisrael. How can you dismiss Issa Deraisa where there's a chaylik on it? Ishtik. He didn't have a response to this. In fact, the Mar V'amai Ishtik, why was it quiet? V'amar Rava, Hilchos Kavos Rav Shimon ben Lakish, Bahani Tlas. We only pass on Reish Lakish on three things. And one of them, and this din of that gid that are eventually going to become hard, Rabbi Yechon said it could be included in the Pesach. We did not pass on like Reish Lakish. That was not one of the three. So Gemara Shani Hachad Ahad Rabbi Yechon Legabe Reish Lakish. Although it's not in this case of the gidin that are saifai lahakshas, we don't include it amongst those things that where we pass on Rav Shimon Keneged Rabbi Yochanan. That's because Rabbi Yochanan, in this case as well, in this case was, sorry, not as well, Rabbi Yochanan was maskim to Reish Lakish, so it ended up not really being a machlokes. So although the truth is we pass on Reish Lakish, we also pass on Rabbi Yochanan because he ultimately agreed to Reish Lakish. Damalei al takniteni b'loshen yachid ani shayna. Because when they were asked about a similar case that was dependent on this question, he said, even though I paskin not like Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, don't bother me with my psak, because I only said it over b'shem yachid. That was depending on a Mishnah where there was such a psak, but that was only a yachid, and there was a rabban that was chaylik on it. So ultimately, I agreed with Reish Lakish, who was chaylik. Ahu nishbar etzem v'yatza l'chutz. There was an animal that had a broken bone, and the bone stuck out, so therefore it should have answered the aver. The shtakel kurtisamine, but there was brave basar covering it, so it shouldn't passel. But the problem was that this wasn't just a compound fracture, but not only was it fractured, there was even a piece of the bone that was missing. It fell off of it. Also, it came to Abaya to ask, on this case, does the fact that the ar and the basar cover it, does that make it that it's going to recover, and therefore it won't, the animal and the limb will not be aser if you have a shchita of the animal. Shayat Tlosa Ridley, he did not know the answer. He had to wait 3 regalim to keep asking, going to see when they got together. He said, I'll present it to the Olam by the regal when everyone gets together. But nobody had an answer. The Charifas Akina. Go to Rava, the son of Rabbi Yosef Bar Chama, because he's very sharp. He'll know the answer. Also, the Mishnah says that if the bone broke and it went out, it's going to be asr. But if it's covered with basar, it's mutter. Mali nafal, mali isa. What difference does it make whether the bone is there or not? It said nishbaratzav yasal chutz. There was no nafkamina of whether it went l'chutz. It doesn't make a difference whether it's still attached or not. Amalei Ravina l'Rava mislaket mahu. What's the din where you have that the iron basar is covering over this compound fracture, which we say is mutter? What happens if let's say the iron and the basar is not all unified, but it's a bunch of different isolated pieces? Can you add it up to say that it's roiv of the bone is covered? Misroisis mal. What's the din if it's very flattened out? So it's not. It's there's not a lot of bone and basar left. There's not a lot of ar and basar on top of it. It's a very thin layer. Mismas. What happens if this ar and basar is going bad? It's infected and it's not good. It's not healthy ar and basar. Hechidami mismas. So what is considered that it's not healthy? Whatever the veterinarian, when he sees such a wound, will remove such skin and basar to prompt the healing, which it's obviously not healthy. It's not going to recover. That's considered mismasmas. We don't have an answer. What happens if there's a bunch of holes in this skin and basar? Niklef mal. What if it's peeled away from the bone and then laid back on top of it? So it's not attached. Nistikma, what if the basar is split? Nitel shlish hatachtan mal. What happens if this aram basar, the bottom third of the basar was removed? So it's not a full thickness of the aram basar on top of the bone. So he said the last one, Tashma Armaula Amrav Yechon Ar Harei Kibasar. We said Ar is like basar, so it's mashma that you don't even need the basar. So if R itself is enough, so certainly if part of the basar is missing, it should be enough. So no, Dilma de Kana Mashchadide. That which we say R is enough is only when that's where the R is firmly attached to the bone. But if there was originally R together with basar, maybe that would pass it. Amravashi Kavina Beira Papi Ibailan. Niktad Kamin Tabas Mao. What if the R and basar is fully detached from the surrounding aram basar? It's just a patch, a round patch like a ring. If it's surrounded by a ring where there's no aram basar attached to the rest of the aram basar, just one island of aram basar, is that going to also recover? He answers the question from Yudam Rav. I asked this question of Amru. If you scratch the edges with a bone, and that causes it to attach to the bone, even if it's just a patch of aram basar, it attaches to the bone by scratching with the bone. You use a second bone, like not the broken bone, obviously, a different piece of bone to scratch it. That will cause it to stimulate it to grow, and it will heal. Avol parzula mizrav zar. If you use metal instead of a piece of bone to scratch it, that's not good. That's going to cause it to get worse, and it won't heal. But this only works when this patch will only regenerate if it's attached to the bone. But if it's not attached to the bone, then it's eventually just going to fall off, and you disregard it, and it will be considered that it doesn't have roiv aram basar covering it, and it will be a treifa. Or the limb will, depending on where it is, the limb will be us. Zok the Mishnah. Hashaychus habehema matzah bashilya. Someone who shechs a behema and you find inside of it an amniotic sac, which is when the water breaks, that means that the amniotic sac broke and the liquid that surrounds it, the amniotic liquid falls off, comes out. So if you found inside, if you shech the animal and you find inside of this amniotic sac without a discernible fetus inside, which we can assume that the fetus has dissolved into the sac. So just a sac without any uber inside of it. Nefesh hayava teichlena. Someone who is not fussy can go ahead and eat it. It's not going to be usher because it's not even menachai, because the shchita is materit. But it's not considered to be basar. First of all, it's not going to be also tumas oichlin as basar. That if it gets wet, then it's hochshel lekabel tuma. It's not going to be, since it's not something that people normally eat, except for this person who's not fussy. So it's not considered to be basar. It's considered like a hoof or a bone that it's not able to be lekabel tuma. V'loy tumas nevelis, and it's also not considered to be a nevela. Because even if there was no shechita, it's not considered part of the animal's basar. It's considered to be, even though the shechita works for it, but it's not considered to be basar of the behema, that it should become tameh through the alts nevela, just like we said, like bone and hooves are not considered nevela. Chishav aleh, but if someone intended to eat it, right, this not fussy person intended to eat it, so then metama tumas oichlin. Then if that converts it into oichlin, it means even though if a person ate it, we said if a person ate it, he's allowed to eat it, and then we said it's eina metama tumas oichlin. That's where a person did not decide to eat it, but if a person made the decision to eat it, at that point it becomes treated as oichlin, which if it becomes wet, it'll be hochshel lekabel tuma. Avaloi tumas nevelis, but we'll never get the tumas nevelis because it's not considered basar of the behemoth. as part of the behemoth. Shilya sheyatsa miktsasa, but if the shilya partially came out, it emerged from the womb of the mother, asura ba'achila, then it becomes asa ba'achila because even if you shecht it, because it's possible that the part that went out included the head of the dissolved fetus, so it's considered to be born, and then the shechita of the mother cannot be materit. Simen vlad be'isha v'simen vlad be'behema. This portion that came out is considered to be a newborn, both for the mother as well for a human as well as for a behemoth. Hamavakeresh pila shilya, a animal that or a woman that miscarried a shilya. I guess no, it's not talking about a woman. It's talking about just a behemoth. A behemoth that's having its first birth. So if it's a bechar, if it's a male, the din is it becomes kachim. But instead of giving birth, it just miscarried this amniotic sac. Yashlichana leklavim. It doesn't have any kedusha of a bechar. You could throw it to the dogs, like the Gemara is going to explain, because first of all, it's a 50% chance that it's female, which is not a bechar, so therefore it has no kedusha. And secondly, it's possible that this would have had the form of a different animal, which also excludes it. That means if it would have the fetus that dissolved might have not had the form of this animal, which also excludes it from the din of bechar. So you have a more than 50%. You put together the chances of female plus the chance that it had the form of a different animal, both of which now don't have kedusha bechar. So roivis is not kedusha bechar. Therefore, you don't have to treat it with kedusha. Over mukdashin, if it wasn't that it was a bechar possibly, but the mother had been hokdash as a carbon, tikaver, then you have to bury it. You can't feed it to the dogs. It has the kedusha of kachim. Then carbon, I say, but dachim, you can't bury it by the fork in the road. You can't hang it on a tree because this is something that the goyim used to do for their kishuv. Where does this come from? This din that we said in the Gemara that if the shilya came out partially, it's going to be aser because we're worried that maybe the roish was in it. So it's coming to tell you the shilya that's inside you could eat. So maybe even if part of it came out, you could also eat it. The pasuk says a lashon miyat to exclude that if it came out partially, it's going to be asa. Michti ain't shila below vlad lamali kra. But we have a svara for this. We said that maybe the roish is in that part. So why do we need a pasuk to tell you that if a part of it went out, you can't eat it? Maybe it's because it's already born before the shechita, and it doesn't come mutter with the shechita of the mother. So Gemara cross machta biyama. Einachanami, the cross is just an asmachta, but really the svara is the reason why it's awesome. We said ve'ena metama. We said it's not going to be metama tumas oichlin and tumas nevela. Boyrovitz wanaf. Or chamar sheshol gomal. If you have the skin of a chamar that you've soaked, that softened it, so it became able to. It's something now. It's soft enough that it's able to be. What's the din? Is it going to be that it's? Is it going to be able to become tamei as tumas eichlin? Lemai. So come on. Ila tumas eichlin. If you're talking about whether it becomes tamei tumas eichlin, tnina ve'ila tumas nevelis. And if you're saying about whether it becomes, if it didn't get a shechita, that it becomes an avela, so right, there's no such thing as shechita of a donkey. So it's dead. If it's dead, it should become an avela, or is it treated like the hooves and the bones that don't become an avela, even though you've cooked it to where it's soft enough to eat? So we have both of those things, both those questions. We have Mishnais. Tumas Eichlin, the Tanya ha'arj v'ashilya, emetama Tumas Eichlin. We said the skin as well as the the shilya of an animal do not become tummy tumas eichlin, um, because they're not edible. But if you soaked the ar that it became soft enough to eat, then it becomes eichel and it can become tummy. I guess it automatically becomes tummy because it was already in liquid. It doesn't need any additional liquid to make it tummy, to make it huksha. Tumas nevela namitin. And we also have, as far as the nevela question, we say that benevlasa and nevela becomes tame, v'loy ba'ar, but not the skin, v'loy ba'tzamas and not the bones, v'loy begin not the sinus, v'loy b'kranim and not the horns, v'loy b'tlav and not the hooves. So you see that ar, whether it was soaked or not, does not become an nevela. And the reason for this, where you cook them for, it's only where you cook them for a long time with spices and you made them soft. So you see, even if you make it soft, it can't become tumas nevel. So we have one Mishnah that says that as far as the tumas eichlin, it can become tamei, and legabe tumas nevel, it can. We are talking about tumas eichlin. Either the Mishnah already said that tumas eichlin, it is capable of becoming aser. One might have thought that maybe the chamor is different because it's disgusting, so it can't be included even after you soak it. Zok the Gemara, shil yishayatzusa. We said in the Mishnah, if it partially came out, it's also even after the shechita. That's only when there's not a vlad together. You know what, this is going to take. It's already 7:10. I'm going to have to let you go. Yeah, I really hoped that we were going to finish, but I guess we'll have to do it.